The Galactic Conclave Station hung in the darkness of space like a jewel made of metal and light. It orbited the neutral world of Prime, and today it was filled with representatives from 12 different spacefaring species. They had gathered for the annual strength trials, a ceremonial competition that determined which species would hold the most influence in galactic politics for the coming year. Daniel Cole stood near the back of the human delegation, watching the alien representatives with quiet interest. He was 34 years old, average in height and build, with brown hair that was starting to show a few strands of gray. He was not a diplomat or a soldier. He was just an engineer who had volunteered for this mission because he needed to be somewhere other than Earth. His younger brother had died in a mining accident on Europa 6 months ago, and Daniel could not bear to stay in the places that reminded him of everything he had lost. Ambassador Laura walked at the front of their group, her posture straight and her expression calm. She had warned them all before they arrived that other species did not think highly of humans. She had told them to expect insults and to respond with dignity. Daniel had nodded along with everyone else, thinking he understood what she meant. He had not understood at all. The moment they entered the main assembly hall, the whispers began. Daniel could not understand most of the alien languages, but the translation device in his ear converted their words into English with only a slight delay. He heard phrases like soft creatures and barely evolved, and how did they even reach the stars without killing themselves first? A massive figure pushed through the crowd and stopped directly in front of Ambassador. He stood 9 feet tall, covered in armored scales that gleamed under the station lights. His eyes were yellow with vertical slits, and when he spoke, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. This was the unyielding, champion of the people and winner of the last 3 strength trials. Looked down at the human delegation with obvious contempt. He said that he had heard rumors that the soft ones would attend this year, but he had not believed it. He asked if they had come to watch real species compete, or if they had simply gotten lost on their way to somewhere safer. Ambassador smiled politely and said that humanity was honored to participate in the conclave and looked forward to learning from their galactic neighbors. Laughed, and the sound was not friendly. He said that learning was all humans could do, since they certainly could not fight. He pointed out that they had no claws, no armor, no venom, and no natural weapons of any kind. He said their skin could be pierced by a sharp stick, and their bones could be broken by a child of his species. He declared that humans were not warriors. They were prey animals who had somehow stumbled into space by accident. Other aliens nearby laughed and added their own insults. A tall, thin being with silver skin said that humans lived such short lives that they barely had time to learn anything useful before they died. A creature that looked like a cross between a bear and a spider said that humans needed machines to survive in any environment other than their own soft little planet. Daniel listened to all of this in silence. His hands were relaxed at his sides, but his jaw was tight. He thought about his brother, who had died trying to save 3 from a collapsed tunnel. His brother had been soft too, by these standards. He had died anyway, doing something brave. Ambassador maintained her composure throughout the insults. She thanked for his warm welcome and said that humanity hoped to prove itself worthy of its seat on the council. Snorted and walked away, his heavy footsteps echoing through the hall. The strength trials were scheduled to begin the following morning. Each species would send a champion to face challenges in the wilderness preserve on the planet below. The preserve was a controlled environment that contained dangerous animals from across the galaxy. Champions would be tested on their ability to survive, to hunt, and to fight. A warrior approached Daniel while he was eating dinner in the station cafeteria. The warrior was smaller than but still towered over Daniel by more than 2 feet. He asked if the humans had chosen their champion yet. He said he wanted to know who would provide the entertainment tomorrow. Daniel said nothing. He just kept eating his meal. The warrior laughed and walked away. That night, High Observer addressed the assembled delegates. She was an elder, ancient and wise, with skin like weathered stone and eyes that seemed to see everything. She explained the rules of the trials and emphasized that honor and fair judgment were the highest values her people held. She wished all champions glory and victory. Then she paused. Her expression changed from ceremonial calm to genuine concern. She announced that there had been an incident in the preserve. A creature from the restricted zone had escaped containment. The trials would be suspended until further notice. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Daniel heard fear in voices that had been confident and mocking just hours before. Demanded to know what had escaped. High Observer hesitated before answering. She said it was a. The effect was immediate. Warriors from a dozen species went pale or stepped backward or made gestures that Daniel assumed were meant to ward off evil. Even the champion who feared nothing seemed to shrink slightly. Daniel leaned toward Lieutenant Maya-Tors, the security officer standing beside him. He asked what it was. Maya checked her and then looked up with a troubled expression. She said it was a predator from a death world, a planet where everything evolved to kill everything else. The hunted through a combination of incredible speed, paralytic venom, and near-perfect camouflage. It had killed members of every species that had ever encountered it. Then came worse news. A group of young delegates from various species had been touring the preserve when the escape occurred. They were now trapped in an observation bunker with the prowling outside. Communications were limited, but they were alive. For now. A diplomat named Counselor pushed to the front of the crowd. His daughter was among the trapped delegates. He begged someone to rescue them. He offered anything his people had to give. High Observer looked at the assembled warriors. She asked who would volunteer to enter the preserve and save the young ones. Silence. Crossed his arms and said that fighting was not bravery. It was suicide. He said that no one could blame a warrior for refusing to throw his life away. Other warriors nodded in agreement. They looked at the floor or at the walls or anywhere except at the desperate father begging for help. Daniel Cole stepped forward. He said he would go. The laughter started immediately. Aliens pointed at him, certain he was making a joke. When they realized he was serious, the laughter turned to disbelief. Shook his head and said they should prepare the humans' memorial now. It would save time later. Daniel ignored him. He was already walking toward the transport bay. Ambassador caught his arm and asked him what he thought he was doing. She reminded him that he was an engineer, not a soldier. Daniel looked at her with calm eyes. He said that he had spent 15 years working in environments that would kill most humans in minutes. He had survived ice storms on Europa, dust cyclones on Mars, and pressure failures in deep space. He knew how to survive when survival seemed impossible. He gently removed her hand from his arm and continued walking. Behind him, he heard call out that they should say their goodbyes now, because no prey animal had ever walked into his territory and walked out again. Daniel did not look back. He just kept walking toward the transport that would take him to the planet below. The transport descended through the atmosphere of Prime, and Daniel watched the planet grow larger through the small window. It was a beautiful world, covered in dense forests and winding rivers that gleamed silver in the light of 3 distant moons. Under different circumstances, he might have enjoyed the view. The pilot was a nervous with 4 arms and large black eyes. He told Daniel that he would drop him at the edge of the preserve, 2 kilometers from the observation bunker, where the young delegates were trapped. He said he could not get any closer because they had already destroyed 2 automated rescue drones that had tried to approach. Daniel nodded and said that 2 kilometers was fine. He checked his equipment one more time. He had a small light attached to his belt, a blade that was barely longer than his forearm, and a medical kit with basic supplies. That was all. The pilot stared at him and asked if he was serious about going in with just that. Daniel said that heavy equipment would slow him down. Speed and quiet were more important than firepower against something that hunted through ambush. The pilot shook his head and said that humans were even stranger than he had heard. The transport touched down in a small clearing, and Daniel stepped out into the alien forest. The air was warm and thick with unfamiliar smells. Bioluminescent plants glowed softly in shades of blue and green, casting strange shadows between the massive trees. The 3 moons hung low on the horizon, providing just enough light to see by. Daniel stood still for a long moment, letting his senses adjust to this new environment. He had learned this technique in the tunnels of Europa, where rushing forward without awareness could get you killed. He listened to the sounds of the forest, the distant calls of unknown creatures, the rustle of wind through leaves that were shaped like spirals. He took note of which direction the wind was blowing and made sure to stay downwind as much as possible. Then he began to move. Back on the station, the assembled delegates watched through satellite feeds that projected onto the main hall's display screens. Most of them expected to witness a quick death, that was legendary for its efficiency. Some predators played with their food. The simply killed, quickly and without waste. Stood near the front of the crowd, his arms crossed over his massive chest. He muttered that the human would be dead within the hour. He said it was almost a shame, because the little creature had shown more courage than sense, and that deserved some small respect. High Observer said nothing. She simply watched the screen with ancient, thoughtful eyes. Daniel moved through the forest using skills he had developed over 15 years of working in deadly environments. He stayed low when the terrain allowed it. He used the thick vegetation for cover. He paused frequently to listen and observe before continuing forward. After 30 minutes, he found the first sign of a tree had been gouged by something with claws that could cut through bark like paper. The marks were fresh, still oozing sap. Daniel studied them carefully and estimated the creature's size based on the spacing of the claw marks. It was big, probably 3 meters long from head to tail, and it had passed this way recently. He activated his short-range communicator and tried to reach the observation bunker. Static filled his ear for several seconds before a voice broke through. It was young and female and trying very hard to sound calm. She identified herself as daughter of counselor. She said there were 7 of them trapped in the bunker. 2 were injured, 1 badly. She asked who she was speaking to. Daniel said his name and told her he was coming to get them out. There was a pause before responded. She asked if he was human. Daniel said yes. Another pause, said that she did not understand. She said her people and others had not been kind to humans since they arrived at the conclave. She asked why a human would risk his life for them. Daniel said that was a question they could discuss after everyone was safe. For now, he needed information about He asked if she knew anything about its hunting patterns or weaknesses. She had studied predators from across the galaxy. She told Daniel everything she knew about It was an ambush predator that relied on short explosive bursts of speed to catch its prey. It had near-perfect camouflage that allowed it to blend into almost any environment. Its venom could paralyze most species within seconds of contact. However, it was not built for long pursuits. Its body was optimized for quick kills, not extended chases. Daniel stored this information carefully in his mind. He thanked and told her to keep everyone calm. He said he would contact her again when he was closer. He continued moving through the forest, but now he had the beginning of a plan forming in his head. They found him an hour later. Daniel was crossing a small stream when he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. It was an instinct that had saved his life more than once, a primitive warning system that humans had carried with them since they were prey animals on the African savanna millions of years ago. He did not run. Running from an ambush predator was exactly what it expected. Instead, he dropped flat into the water and rolled to his left. Something massive passed through the space where his head had been a moment before. He caught a glimpse of scales that shifted color like oil on water, of claws that gleamed in the moonlight, of eyes that burned with predatory intelligence. They landed on the far bank of the stream and turned to face him. For a long moment, predator and prey stared at each other. Daniel slowly got to his feet. Water dripped from his clothes. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had faced death before, in collapsing tunnels and explosive decompression, and 100 other ways that the universe tried to kill humans who dared to leave their home world. They crouched low, preparing to spring again. Daniel turned and ran. He did not run in a straight line. He zigzagged between trees, using the dense vegetation to slow the creature down. It was faster than him in a straight chase, but the forest was full of obstacles that its larger body had to navigate around. On the station, the watching aliens gasped in surprise. They had expected the human to die in the first attack. Instead, he was alive and running, and was pursuing but not catching him. Leaned forward, his expression changing from contempt to confusion. He said the human should be dead by now. He did not understand what he was seeing. High Observer allowed herself a small smile. She said that perhaps there were things about humans that the galaxy had not yet learned. Daniel ran for 10 minutes before ducking into a hollow beneath a fallen tree. They passed by overhead, its footsteps shaking the ground. It stopped and sniffed the air, searching for his scent, but Daniel had rolled through mud and crushed bioluminescent plants over his skin to mask his smell. After several tense minutes, the creature moved on, continuing its hunt. Daniel waited until the sounds of its passage faded completely. Then he emerged from hiding and began moving again, not toward safety, but deeper into the forest, toward the observation bunker where 7 young beings waited for rescue. He had learned something important in that first encounter. That was fast and deadly, but it was not patient. It expected quick kills and became frustrated when prey escaped. That frustration could be used against it. Daniel smiled grimly to himself. On Earth, humans had a name for what he was about to do. They called it persistence hunting. It was how his ancestors had survived on the plains of Africa, chasing prey that was faster than them until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. He was about to learn that humans were not prey. They were something far more dangerous. They were the species that never stopped coming. He checked his communicator and adjusted his course slightly. The bunker was still 1.5 kilometers away. Between him and those trapped young people stood a monster that had killed members of every species in the galaxy. Daniel started moving again, and this time he made sure they could hear him. The hunt had truly begun. The forest of Prime was alive with sounds and shadows as Daniel Cole ran through the night. Behind him, he could hear the crashing through the undergrowth, its massive body breaking branches and crushing plants as it pursued its prey. It was gaining on him, but not as quickly as it should have been. Daniel had been running for 3 hours now. His lungs burned and his legs ached, but he did not slow down. He maintained a steady pace that his body could sustain for long periods, not sprinting but not jogging either. It was the pace that marathon runners used on Earth, the rhythm that humans had evolved over millions of years of chasing animals across the African savanna. It was built for speed, not endurance. It could outrun Daniel in a straight sprint, but it could not maintain that speed for long. Every time it got close, Daniel would change direction suddenly, forcing the creature to stop and adjust its course. Every time it fell back to catch its breath, Daniel kept moving forward at that same relentless pace. On the conclave station, the assembled delegates watched in stunned silence. The satellite feeds showed a small human figure moving through the forest with a predator the size of a ground transport chasing behind. Hours had passed, and the human was still alive. The unyielding stood at the front of the crowd, his yellow eyes fixed on the screen. His expression had changed completely since the hunt began. The contempt was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like awe. He muttered that this was impossible. He said that no prey animal could outrun for 3 hours. A diplomat standing nearby said that perhaps the human was not prey after all. Did not respond, he just kept watching. High Observer stood apart from the crowd, her ancient eyes taking in every detail of the chase. She had lived for over 400 years and had seen many things that others considered impossible. She had learned long ago that the universe was full of surprises for those who thought they understood it completely. Daniel paused at the top of a small ridge to check his communicator. He had been updating every 30 minutes, letting her know he was still alive and still coming. Now he called her again, his breath coming in controlled gasps. Answered immediately. Her voice was tense but hopeful. She asked if he was still okay. Daniel said he was fine and asked about the others in the bunker. Reported that everyone was holding on. The badly injured one, a young named, was stable for now. She had done what she could with the limited medical supplies they had. She said they could hear the passing by sometimes, circling the bunker, but it seemed distracted by something else. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. He said that was him. He was keeping the creature busy. Was quiet for a moment. Then she asked how a single human was keeping a busy for hours. Daniel said it was a long story involving evolution and the African savanna. He promised to explain everything later. For now, he needed her help with something. He needed to know if they had any weak points, any places where its armor was thinner or its nerves were closer to the surface. Thought about this carefully. She said that most predators had vulnerable spots at the base of the skull and behind the front legs. There was no exception. There was a nerve cluster where the neck met the spine. A strong blow there would cause temporary paralysis. But she warned him that getting close enough to strike that spot would be almost impossible. Daniel thanked her and said he would figure something out. He told her to be ready to move when he gave the signal. Then he ended the communication and looked back the way he had come. There was visible in the distance a darker shadow among the shadows of the forest. Its camouflage was flickering now, unable to maintain itself properly as the creature grew tired. Its movements were slower, more labored. It was exhausted. But it was not finished. It was still a deadly predator, still capable of killing Daniel in a single strike if he made a mistake. Daniel checked his supplies. He had used one of his stimulant patches an hour ago, and he had 2 more left. His water was almost gone. His body was running on reserves now, but he had trained for this kind of endurance during his years in the outer solar system, where rescue could be days away and survival meant pushing through pain and exhaustion. He started running again, and the followed. Another 2 hours passed. The 3 moons of Prime moved across the sky, and the first hints of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon. Daniel had led the creature in a wide circle around the observation bunker, always staying far enough ahead to remain alive but close enough to keep the interested. Now it was time for the next phase of his plan. He changed direction and headed for a rocky clearing he had spotted earlier on his mapping device. The clearing was near a cliff edge, with limited vegetation and nowhere for it to hide. It would be a poor hunting ground for an ambush predator. It would also be the place where Daniel made his stand. They followed him into the clearing just as the sun broke over the horizon. Morning light flooded the rocky ground, and for the first time, Daniel got a clear look at the creature that had been chasing him all night. It was terrifying. It was nearly 4 meters long, covered in scales that shifted between gray and brown and green as it moved. Its legs were thick with muscle, built for explosive power. Its claws were each the length of Daniel's forearm. Its head was triangular, with a mouth full of teeth designed to tear through armor and bone alike. But its eyes told a different story. They were bloodshot and weary. Its tongue hung from its mouth as it panted for breath. Its camouflage flickered and failed, unable to function properly anymore. The creature was exhausted in a way it had probably never experienced before. Daniel faced it across the clearing. He was exhausted too, more tired than he had ever been in his life. But he was still standing. He was still ready. It let out a sound that was half roar and half wheeze. It crouched low, gathering the last of its strength for a final attack. Daniel did not run. He pulled his blade from his belt and held it ready. His ancestors had faced lions and leopards with nothing more than sharpened sticks. They had survived because they were too stubborn to die. He carried that same stubbornness in his blood. The creature charged. On the station, the watching aliens cried out in alarm. This was the moment they had been dreading. The human had performed an impossible feat of endurance, but surely he could not defeat it in direct combat. Leaned forward, his claws gripping the railing in front of him. He whispered something that might have been a prayer in the language. High Observer clasped her hands together, her ancient eyes wide with something that looked like hope. They closed the distance in seconds, its exhausted body still capable of terrifying speed over short distances. Daniel waited, counting the heartbeats, watching the creature's muscles bunch and extend. At the last possible moment, he threw himself to the side. The claws slashed through the space where he had been standing. Its momentum carried it forward, unable to stop or turn quickly. Daniel rolled to his feet and faced the creature again. It turned and charged again. Daniel dodged again. They repeated this dance 5 times, then 10, then 15. Each time they attacked, Daniel evaded by the smallest possible margin, conserving his energy while forcing the creature to expend more of its own. The watching aliens counted the minutes. 20 passed, then 30. Finally, they stumbled. Its legs buckled. It fell to the rocky ground and did not get up. Daniel approached carefully, blade in hand. The creature's eyes followed him, but it could not move. Its body had simply given out. He remembered what had told him about the nerve cluster at the base of the skull. He circled around to this head, moving slowly, watching for any sign of renewed aggression. The creature made a low sound in its throat, almost like a groan. It was not threatening. It was just tired. Daniel raised his blade and struck the nerve cluster with the pommel, driving it home with all the strength he had left. It went still. It was not dead, just unconscious. Daniel had not killed it. He had just needed it to stop. He stood over the fallen predator, breathing hard, his legs shaking. Then he did something that made the watching aliens gasp in disbelief. He bent down and began to lift the creature onto his shoulders. It weighed nearly twice what he did. His muscles screamed in protest. His spine felt like it would snap under the weight. But he had carried heavy equipment through the tunnels of Europa. He had hauled injured to safety when the dust storms of Mars made it impossible to see. He had learned that the human body could do far more than people thought possible when lives depended on it. He started walking toward the observation bunker, the monster draped across his shoulders. One step at a time. Daniel Cole walked through the forest of Prime with a monster on his shoulders and the rising sun at his back. Every step was agony. The weighed more than 200 kilograms, and Daniel's body was already pushed far beyond its normal limits. His legs trembled with each movement. His back felt like it was on fire. Sweat poured down his face and stung his eyes. But he kept walking. On the conclave station, no one spoke. The assembled delegates stood in complete silence, watching the satellite feed with expressions of disbelief and wonder. They saw a small human figure moving slowly through the alien forest, carrying a creature that should have killed him hours ago. The unyielding stood frozen in place, his yellow eyes locked on the screen. His mouth hung slightly open, and his arms had fallen to his sides. He had spent his entire life believing that strength meant muscles and armor, and the ability to crush enemies with raw physical power. He had mocked humans for being soft and weak, for lacking claws and scales and natural weapons. Now he was watching a human carry on his back. High Observer allowed tears to form in her ancient eyes. She had lived for over 400 years and had witnessed countless acts of courage and strength. She had seen warriors face impossible odds and emerge victorious, but she had never seen anything quite like this. A young warrior standing near asked how this was possible. He said humans were supposed to be the weakest species in the galaxy. He did not understand what he was seeing. Answered slowly, his voice quiet and thoughtful. He said that perhaps they had been measuring strength wrong all along. Daniel reached the observation bunker 40 minutes after defeating The bunker was a small structure built into the side of a hill, with reinforced walls and a heavy door designed to keep dangerous animals out. 7 young beings had been trapped inside for nearly a full day, listening to a predator circle their shelter and wondering if help would ever come. Daniel stopped outside the door and carefully lowered to the ground. His muscles screamed with relief as the weight left his shoulders. He had to lean against the bunker wall for a moment, breathing hard, waiting for his legs to stop shaking. Then he knocked on the door. A voice from inside asked who was there. It was the who had helped him understand the weaknesses. Daniel said it was him. He said the creature was unconscious and tied up. He said it was safe to come out now. The door opened slowly. Stepped out first, her silver skin pale with exhaustion and her large eyes wide with amazement. She looked at Daniel, dirty and battered and barely able to stand. Then she looked at the unconscious lying at his feet. She said she did not believe it. She said no one would believe it. Daniel smiled weakly and said she could tell people whatever she wanted. Right now, he just needed to sit down. 6 other young beings emerged from the bunker behind. There was a named, badly injured with a bandage wrapped around his midsection. There was a youth who looked at the unconscious with pure terror, clearly imagining what would have happened if help had not arrived. There was a male and 2 members of species Daniel did not recognize. They all stared at him with the same expression of wonder and disbelief. Daniel contacted the station and requested medical evacuation. His voice was calm and professional, as if he had just completed a routine engineering task instead of running down a legendary predator and carrying it half a kilometer through alien terrain. The transport arrived 20 minutes later. Medical personnel rushed out to tend to the injured and help the exhausted delegates into the vehicle. 2 security officers approached the unconscious with restraint equipment, their movements nervous and cautious, even though the creature was clearly not going to wake up anytime soon. Daniel sat on a rock near the bunker and watched all of this happen, sat down beside him. She did not say anything at first. She just looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Finally, she asked him the question she had asked before, the question that had been bothering her since he first made contact. "Why did you come for us?" Daniel thought about this for a moment. He thought about his brother, who had died saving who barely knew his name. He thought about the values he had grown up with, the belief that a person's worth was measured by what they did for others. He thought about all the times humans had been told they were not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy of standing alongside the great species of the galaxy. He said that where he came from, helping people who needed help was just what you did. He said it did not matter if those people had been kind to you or cruel to you. What mattered was that they needed help and you were able to provide it. Was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that her people owed him a debt they could never repay. Daniel shook his head. He said there was no debt. He said he had not done this to be owed anything. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. The transport lifted off and began the journey back to the station. Daniel leaned his head against the wall and closed his eyes. His body ached in ways he had never experienced before. He would probably need days of medical treatment and rest before he felt normal again. But everyone was alive. That was what mattered. On the station, the delegates were already preparing for their return. The main assembly hall was filled with representatives from all 12 species, and for the first time since the human delegation had arrived, no one was laughing or making cruel comments. The transport docked and the doors opened. Medical personnel guided the rescued delegates out first, followed by the security team with the still unconscious. Then Daniel Cole stepped out, walking slowly and carefully, his body showing every sign of the ordeal he had endured. The hall went completely silent. Daniel looked out at the sea of alien faces. He saw warriors who had called him prey. He saw who had mocked his short. He saw elders who had questioned whether humans deserved their seat on the council. He saw dozens of beings who had dismissed humanity as weak and worthless. None of them were laughing now. The unyielding pushed through the crowd and approached Daniel. The massive warrior towered over the exhausted human, but there was no contempt in his posture anymore. There was something closer to respect. Said that he had been wrong. He said that he had spent his whole life believing that strength was measured in scales and claws and the ability to kill quickly. He said that Daniel had shown him a different kind of strength, one that he had never considered before. He said that Daniel had shown him the strength to endure when anyone else would have quit, the strength to keep moving when the body screamed for rest, the strength to fight not for glory or dominance, but simply because others needed help. Lowered his head in the gesture of deepest respect. He said that he was honored to have witnessed this day. Other delegates began to approach, adding their own words of praise and respect. Counselor embraced Daniel with tears streaming down his face, thanking him over and over for saving his daughter. Representatives from species that had mocked humans just hours before now looked at Daniel with something approaching reverence. Daniel accepted their thanks with quiet grace. He did not gloat or remind them of their earlier cruelty. He simply nodded and said that he was glad everyone was safe. Ambassador Laura appeared at his side, her eyes shining with pride. She put a hand on his shoulder and said that he had done something remarkable. She said that he had shown the galaxy what humanity was really made of. Daniel looked at her and said that he had just done what any human would have done in his place. He said that helping others was simply who humans were. High Observer watched all of this from across the hall. Her ancient eyes saw more than the others did. She saw a turning point in galactic history, a moment when perceptions shifted and old prejudices began to crumble. She saw the beginning of something new. She smiled to herself and began planning what she would say tomorrow at the formal assembly. The strength trials would need to be reconsidered. The very definition of strength would need to change. And humans, those soft and fragile creatures who had stumbled into space by accident, would be at the center of that change. The main assembly hall of the Galactic Conclave Station was filled to capacity. Representatives from all 12 spacefaring species stood in careful arrangement according to ancient protocol, their attention focused on the raised platform at the center of the chamber. This was the formal gathering that would officially conclude the events of the past 2 days, though everyone knew the strength trials had already been decided in a way no one had expected. Daniel Cole stood near the front of the human delegation, wearing clean clothes and looking considerably better than he had the day before. The medical team had treated his exhaustion and minor injuries, though they had marveled at the punishment his body had taken. They said that most beings would have collapsed long before he did. They asked him how he had kept going when his body was telling him to stop. He said that stopping was never really an option, not when people were counting on him. High Observer stepped onto the platform and raised her hands for silence. Her ancient voice carried through the hall with the weight of centuries of wisdom. She said that they had gathered to honor the conclusion of the annual strength trials, but that this year's trials had taken an unexpected form. She said that they had all witnessed something that would change the way they thought about strength and power. She turned to face Daniel and asked him to join her on the platform. Daniel walked forward slowly, aware of every eye in the chamber following his movements. He climbed the steps and stood beside the High Observer, feeling somewhat uncomfortable with all the attention. He was just an engineer who had done what needed to be done. He did not think of himself as a hero. stepped forward from the crowd. She had asked to speak on behalf of all the young delegates who had been rescued, and High Observer had granted her request, climbed onto the platform and stood facing the assembly. She said that she wanted to tell them what had happened from her perspective, from inside the bunker while a monster prowled outside. She said that she and the others had been terrified, convinced that no one would come for them. When she heard that a human had volunteered to rescue them, she had felt despair instead of hope. She had believed, like most of the galaxy, that humans were too weak and too soft to survive against her. She said that she had been wrong. Described the hours she spent communicating with Daniel while he led thee on a chase through the forest. She described his calm voice and his steady determination. She described the moment when she watched through a small window as a human figure approached their bunker, carrying an unconscious on his shoulders as if it were nothing more than a piece of cargo. She said that Daniel had risked everything for people who had given him no reason to care about them. She said that humans had been mocked and insulted since they arrived at the conclave, and yet when danger came, it was a human who stood up while warriors from a dozen other species looked away. She said that Daniel Cole had shown more honor and courage than any champion in the history of the strength trials. The assembly was silent, returned to her place in the crowd, and High Observer turned to Daniel. She asked him a simple question. She asked him why he had done it. Daniel was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he spoke in a clear, steady voice that carried to every corner of the hall. He said that on Earth, humans had a saying. They believed that the measure of a person was not what they did for those who could help them, but what they did for those who could not. Those young people in the bunker had needed help. He was able to help. That was enough. He said that humans did not think of strength the way other species did. For humans, strength was not about muscles or claws or the ability to kill. Strength was about standing up when it would be easier to stay down. Strength was about carrying burdens that were not your own. Strength was about showing mercy when revenge would be easier. He said that his brother had taught him this. His brother had died saving in a mining accident, giving his life so that others could live. His brother had been soft and fragile by galactic standards, just like every other human, but he had been the strongest person Daniel ever knew. The assembly remained silent as Daniel finished speaking. He looked out at the crowd of alien faces, some familiar and some strange, and saw something he had not expected to see. He saw tears. The unyielding stepped forward. The massive warrior approached the platform and stopped at its base, looking up at the small human who had accomplished what no warrior of his species would have attempted. Spoke in a voice that was heavy with emotion. He said that he had spent his life believing that strength was measured by the ability to destroy. He said that he had conquered enemies and won championships and been called a hero by his people. But he had never risked his life for strangers who had given him nothing. He had never carried a burden that was not his own. He said that Daniel Cole had taught him what true strength meant. Lowered his head in the deepest gesture of respect his culture knew. He held the position for a long moment, and then he straightened and looked Daniel in the eye. He said that he would carry this lesson for the rest of his life, and he would teach it to his children and their children after them. He said that humans were no longer prey in the eyes of the. Humans were worthy of the highest respect. One by one, representatives from other species came forward to add their own words. Counselor thanked Daniel again for saving his daughter, saying that no gift could repay what he had done. The delegation offered humanity a trade agreement that would benefit Earth for generations. The elders announced that they would support any motion humans wished to bring before the council. High Observer raised her hands again, and the assembly fell silent. She announced that the strength trials would be reformed. From this day forward, the trials would test not only physical power but also endurance, wisdom, and compassion. True strength, she declared, was not measured in muscle or armor. True strength was measured by the willingness to stand when others fled, to carry burdens that were not your own, and to show mercy when destruction would be easier. She said that humans had taught the galaxy this lesson, and the galaxy would not forget. The assembly erupted in applause. Delegates from species that had never agreed on anything cheered together. Warriors who had built their identities on physical dominance acknowledged that there were other forms of power. Diplomats who had dismissed humanity as irrelevant began making plans for new alliances and partnerships. Daniel stood on the platform and accepted the applause with a humble nod. When the noise finally died down, he spoke one more time. He asked if someone could show him where to get breakfast. He said he had not eaten anything substantial in nearly 2 days. The laughter that followed was not mockery. It was genuine warmth and affection, the kind of laughter shared between friends. Ambassador Laura appeared at Daniel's side as he left the platform. She walked with him toward the station's dining area while delegates from a dozen species approached the human delegation, requesting meetings and cultural exchanges and opportunities to learn more about these remarkable creatures called humans. Laura said quietly that Daniel had changed everything. She said that humanity's place in the galaxy would never be the same after today. Daniel shrugged. He said that all he did was help some people who needed help. He said that any human would have done the same. Laura smiled and said that was exactly the point. She said that humans were special not because they were stronger or faster or smarter than other species. Humans were special because they cared about each other and about anyone else who needed their help. That was the fire that burned inside every human heart. Daniel nodded slowly, thinking about his brother and about everything he had lost and everything he had gained. He said that maybe the galaxy was right to underestimate humans at first. Humans did not look impressive from the outside. They were soft and small and fragile. But inside, where it really mattered, humans were unbreakable. He walked into the dining area and ordered the largest breakfast they had. Behind him, the galaxy was changing. Old prejudices were crumbling. New alliances were forming. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that humans had always known. True strength has nothing to do with the body. True strength comes from the heart. And in that measurement, humans were the strongest species the galaxy had ever seen.